Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and thank you so much for watching. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I made this Unikitty themed cake from the Lego movie. One side is when she's her happy, cute self, and the other side is when she loses her cool a little bit. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and subscribe to my channel for new videos every week. It really helps me out. That being said, let's get started. So I have a 9-inch square cake here, and I've made a little board for myself. I'll have the exact materials and measurements down below. Using my serrated knife, I'm just going to cut a couple of these rectangle shapes out of my cake. I cut 4 in total, and I'm going to start stacking those up on top of that board, just adding some Swiss meringue buttercream into the middle there. Mine was dyed like a reddish color, but that's totally optional. Once it was stacked up, I put it in the fridge for about 10 minutes just so it chilled a little bit, and I'm going to go around all of the edges and trim some of that cake away because I'm going to be using the board as a guide for my buttercream, and I don't want any cake overhanging because I want a nice even layer of buttercream all the way around. Let me be real with you, I frickin' hate square cakes, rectangle cakes, any type of cake that needs a sharp edge is my nemesis. I've attempted many a square cake in my time, and I have never been able to do it with sharp, crisp edges. The only way it looks halfway decent for me is if I use a board as a guide. Once I trimmed away all the excess, I'm adding a crumb coat around my cake. This is going to lock in all of my crumbs and make sure that the final ice isn't going to have any lumps or bumps in it. I put that in the fridge to chill for about 25 minutes, and then when you can touch your finger to the buttercream and none of it comes off, it's ready for the final ice. I ran out of my red, so I'm just using white buttercream, but it is the same buttercream. And I'm adding that to the top and to the sides. Quite a thick layer. I'm being really heavy-handed here. Once the whole thing was covered, I grabbed my bench scraper and I'm going to start going around the sides, digging in deep enough that my bench scraper is hitting up against that board. This is going to act as a guide and help me get those nice crisp sides. You just want to make sure that you are holding your bench scraper straight up and down, not at an angle at all. I kept pulling all of that buttercream that accumulated on the top edge just into the center, trying to get that top as even and level as possible. This took me a really long time. I'm not going to fib to you, it's not the easiest. Square cakes, rectangle cakes, they are a bit of a pain in the butt, but as much time and effort as you put into it is what you're going to get out of it. I kept reapplying my buttercream if there was any gaps and then scraping it back. Putting it in the fridge for about 10 minutes so the buttercream firms up does make it a little bit easier to handle. Ganache would also be great on this cake. Buttercream is not the easiest thing to use for this, but I was making this for somebody and they wanted buttercream, so I just kind of had to suck it up. When I was happy, I put it in the fridge to chill, and then I'm going to start on my fondant. So I've rolled out this long piece of pink fondant, and I did measure the width of the top of my cake, and I want this to cover half of that. So that's how wide I'm making my strip, and I need to make sure that it's long enough that it's going to drape over both sides and the top of the cake. So I'm picking that up and gently draping it over, making sure that the edge is completely flush with the front of the cake. And I'm just going over it with my fondant smoothers to straighten everything out if it gets a little bit wonky when you place it down. Before my fondant has a chance to firm up, I'm going over with my fondant smoothers and just crispifying those edges on the top. I trimmed away the excess using my pizza cutter and then flipped it around and did the exact same thing but with red fondant. I'm taking more of that pink fondant and rolling out a big enough piece that I know it's going to cover the front of my cake, and I'm gently picking that up and just placing it right against the buttercream. I gave it a quick smooth with my hand, and then using a cake board, I'm placing that right up against my cake, and I'm going to flip that down. Keep in mind, my cake is chilled, so it was a lot easier for me to handle. With a really sharp knife, I placed that right up against the side of the cake, and I'm going to trim away all the excess at the sides. I quickly flipped that back up and then went over the front with my fondant smoother, and just to help the seams on the sides be a little more cohesive, I went over them with my fingers, and just the heat from your hands is going to help those seams blend together. Mine definitely were not perfect. The seams were there. I couldn't hide them. Modeling chocolate would be a great thing to use for that because I do know that the seams can blend together a lot easier. This was totally fine for me, but if you're a perfectionist, I do suggest modeling chocolate. I did the exact same thing with my red fondant, and then this is what it looked like. To start on my happy kitty, I rolled out some lighter pink fondant and I'm cutting a long strip out of that. With more of that light pink fondant, I cut away one edge, and then I'm using my cake board here as a guide just to get like a perfect semicircle. I did measure to make sure this was going to fit on the front of my cake. I want it to cover about halfway up on the front. I used a ruler to just mark in a line near the top. I eyeballed a lot of this. You could 100% use a template if you're not confident with that. I'm gonna link the picture that I went off below. It'd be super easy to print out and just copy. I brushed the bottom with a little bit of shortening. You could also use some water, and I'm adding my strip and just trimming off the sides. I added my semicircle right on top of that, just making sure that it was completely flush and pressed up against that strip. While the fondant was still soft, I grabbed a circle cutter and just marked in on either side where I wanted the eyeballs to go and pressed in gently just to give myself a guide, and I cut out both of those. I used that same cutter to punch out 2 circles of white fondant, and I'm adding that to either side, just really tucking it in there. Using a slightly smaller cutter, I punched out 2 circles of this light blue fondant, and I'm going to place that in the middle of each eyeball. Next, I added 2 circles of black, and then just a couple circles of white fondant in the middle for her really big, cute, like anime eyes. I rolled out a long snaky of black fondant that I tapered off at each end, and I'm going to wrap that around the top of each eyeball. I just used a little bit of water to hold that in place. Using a piping tip, I cut out 2 circles of darker pink fondant, and that's going right below each eye on either side for like a little blush. I cut out 1 more circle of that dark pink and then just rolled the sides out a little bit so it's more of an oval shape, and that's going right between her eyes for the nose. With more of that black fondant, I'm adding 3 eyelashes on either side. I rolled out 2 black teardrop shapes for the eyebrows. And then using my X-Acto knife, I very painstakingly cut out this W shape for her mouth. I took more of that darker pink fondant and rolled it out pretty thick. I made myself a quick template based off of the picture I was looking at, and then cut 2 of those out. I did the exact same thing with my red fondant, and then I'm gonna sandwich those together using a little bit of water as my glue and just going around the edges with my fondant smoother just to really make sure that they are right on top of each other and there's no spillage. For the horn, I'm using some red fondant as a base, and you can see I'm rolling out this long tapered shape. I'm pushing the bottom of that into my work surface a little bit just so it has more of a flat bottom and it's going to stand up really nice. I put the ears and the horn aside to dry, and I'm going to start working on the features on her angry side. Just like the happy Unikitty, I'm adding the strip on the bottom and the semicircle, this time just with yellow. I'm adding a strip of light gray to the top. It was a hot mess trying to put this on here straight, so I just had to go back in with my fondant smoothers to make it look less crooked. I punched out 2 spots for the eyes, and because she's ticked off and has this like scowl and her eyes are all squinty, you just want to cut off the top of everything. So you're doing the exact same steps, cutting out the circles of white, red, and black, but you can see that I've basically just cut them in half. I realized that if I didn't trim away a little bit of that yellow fondant, the black I was going to use to line the eyes would be jutting out a little bit, and I did not like that idea at all. So just very carefully, I'm just trimming away a really thin strip underneath each eyeball. So I've added a snaky of black underneath the eyeball, just thin enough to tuck into that blank space, and then another piece of black on top with a little bit of overhang on either side. Using that same gray fondant, I cut out a triangle and then just flipped it upside down, and I'm placing that right in the center of her forehead. For the eyelashes, I didn't roll out the pieces. I did cut out these little itty bitty rectangles, again, 3 for either side. Using a piping tip, I cut out a bunch of circles of black fondant, and then with a smaller piping tip, I just punched the middle out of each of those. I ended up using 6 and just placed those right in the middle of that gray strip. I made this very Harry Potter-esque little lightning bolt template, and then I cut 2 of those out and placed those on either side of that gray triangle. I cut out a smaller triangle of red fondant and put that right in between her eyes for the nose. And then I mixed together a little bit of red and black fondant to get this darker shade and cut out 2 circles of that for either side. I made her like determined pout out of black fondant, and then with a little edible marker just kind of finished off that smirk. To make the horn, I'm starting off with a ball of white fondant, and I want to make this into a cylinder shape. I rolled out more of that white fondant, just a little on the thick side, nothing crazy, just a little bit thicker, and then using my circle cutter that was a larger size than that hockey puck I just made, cut that bad boy out. So I did the exact same thing with my gray fondant, and I'm going to cut everything right down the middle, just being careful that I'm more so sawing through than pushing through, because if you just push through, you're probably going to lose the shape that you created. I did the same thing with my thinner circles and just tried to arrange them so that the white lined up with the white and the gray lined up with the gray. So I added one more smaller circle right in the middle. I just did my best to make it look like one side was all gray and the other side was all white. If you can see a little bit of the color peeking through, it's not a big deal. You just want to make sure it's not super, super obvious. Moving back to my horn, I'm rolling out more of my red fondant and I'm going to drape that over the top of the horn that I brushed with some water. I smooth that down and then cut away the excess with my pizza cutter. And using my X-Acto knife, I'm very carefully going to try and cut all the way around right in the middle. I rolled out some light blue fondant and then did the exact same thing, just being really careful not to cut all the way down through the horn. The sides don't have to be perfection. If your seams are a little bit wonky, that's totally okay. You're just going for, again, one side is all blue and the other side is all red, and it's not very obviously peeking through. I trimmed away any excess at the bottom, and then using my fondant tool, I'm marking in the lines on either side to make it look more like a horn. I cut out a thicker strip each of the red and pink fondant, and I'm pressing that right up against each other using a little bit of water to stick them together. I used the ear as a guide for where I should cut. I don't want that strip to go all the way along the bottom. I want it just to go in the middle. And then I'm brushing that with a little bit more water and putting that right on the bottom of my ear, making sure that the pink is on the pink side and the red is on the red side. I forgot to film myself adding some thin black stripes onto that triangle, so that's what I'm showing you right now. I took the bottom part of my horn and lined it up in the middle of my cake, and then added the ears on either side. I just used some water to attach them. If you want the extra support, you could use a wooden skewer or some dry spaghetti to hold them in place. I pressed a wooden skewer all the way through that base piece for the horn, making sure it went to the bottom of the cake with enough left over at the top to go pretty far into the horn. So this was the final result, guys. It's definitely not perfect, but as far as like square rectangular cakes go, I was really happy with how it turned out. There's definitely some imperfections on there, but I can live with that. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.